Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. My guest today is Mit Vyas. He is currently managing director for Gemba Automation. He started his career at Toyota. He worked for many other large corporations, and then he founded Gemba Automation. It's a company that's helped customers in software, medical devices, fashion, and construction develop profitable and sustainable businesses. So we're going to hear about that career journey and learning and evolution today. Mit has a degree in mechanical engineering from Cal State Poly in Pomona, and the website is gembaautomation.com. So Mit, thank you for joining us here today. Welcome. How are you?
Well, thank you, Mark. I am excited and ready to get going.
Well, yeah, it's going to be great to hear stories and lessons learned along the way. I've already kind of given away at least the short answer to the question I like to ask guests of, like, what was your lean or TPS origin story? For you, it was at Toyota. So fill in the details. Like, what was it like being there?
Sure. So my lean origin story was I began as a employee of Toyota at the age of 20. Mm-hmm. So I learned very young about TPS, learned a lot about the development structure that the company had to offer. But I mean, if you rewind back, I think it's a pretty funny story on how I actually ended up at Toyota. So in terms of, if you take a look at any system, right, and you look at overall system, you say every system has inputs and then they have outputs, right? And when I went to school, I kind of tried to figure out how to apply that to the career that I got, right? So I took a look at school as a system. I said, okay, I'm putting in grades, I'm putting in time, and then but the output that I need from that schooling is to get a good job, right? And in Cal Poly, they had what's called a career center. So I'm like, I started thinking. I said, wait, what does this career? How can this career center help me facilitate this output that I want with getting a good job? So, I mean, in college, I was in a fraternity and we did a lot of volunteer events for the Career Center. We helped them out with a lot of the job fairs. So me and the Career Center employees were on very, very, very good terms because I gave them free labor, basically. And in return, at one time, Toyota was hiring this process engineering intern. So they wanted to fill this role immediately, so they contacted the Career Center, and they had to fill this role within 2 or 3 weeks. So the Career Center said, well, I know one candidate that's just helped me out. So with my solid 2.5 GPA, I was able to get one of what would be called a world-class company out of schooling. So, I've always been infatuated by this concept of how to maximize your outputs by not providing the exact inputs. And Toyota gave me the first example of how to do that.
Yeah. So what facility was that? Tell us a little more the context of the work you did.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was hired at the TABC. So it's the facility that is in Long Beach. And actually it's Toyota's first North American plant. I mean, it's a small facility. They did stamping, and they did stamping, and they did welding for truck beds. But I mean, it was an auto body plant. But what I did was they had I don't know if there's a Hino truck. So Hino is basically the same size as a Penske. So in Japan, right? So in Japan, a lot of the trucks that they have in Japan, the driver sits above the engine because they want to conserve space, right? Now, in America, we don't really do that here. We want the bigger truck. We want the engine in front. So they had to redesign a truck for the American market.
Yeah.
So they had a bunch of Japanese work standards, and they had American work staff. So they needed somebody to come in and create process instruction sheets using the Japanese work standards, communicating with the Japanese staff, and then spending the time on the floor to be able to explain it to the American team members. And that's what I did. And we actually offlined a complete vehicle. So it was all assembly. We had a dyno. It was quite the way to begin my professional journey.
Yeah. So when you talk about inputs and outputs, it's kind of a famous type, Toyota type story of saying, well, they don't give you the answer. They'll let you figure things out. They'll give you a direction. They'll coach you, but they won't tell you exactly how to do something. Was it similar when you came in, no experience with building trucks, of thinking, well, how am I supposed to do this work? How am I supposed to create the instructions? How am I supposed to train people? I'd be curious to hear more about that.
Sure. So let me give you a little bit of a movie. So before my job that I had before Toyota is I was selling board shorts and bikinis at Quicksilver in Laguna Beach. So I was sitting at the beach. I was selling beach apparel, and it was sunny, beautiful, amazing. And then I got this job at Toyota, and my boss, or the person that hired me there, I learned a significant amount from him. George New was the guy that hired me there, and he tells me during the interview, he said, "Hey, you have no problem getting here at 4:30 in the morning, right?" And I'm thinking, he's got to be joking. And sure enough, he wasn't. So in terms of what I think was the greatest addition to my development was the sheer amount of time that they have you spend on the production floor. So they very, very quickly make you realize what actual fact is and what the real world is. So I went from the beach to sitting on at 4:30 in the morning, sitting on a production plant, taking time studies and figuring out how long why we're not meeting tact in certain ways. So the first answer to your question is, I think the extreme importance in understanding what true facts is and just forcing people to spend that much time on the production floor. And that just adds a lot. The other thing is the leadership there. If you take a look like a Venn diagram, the first Venn diagram being real world thinking, and then the other Venn diagram being strategic thinking. For some amazing way, Toyota had a ability to merge those two together, which is actually pretty rare in this world. Yeah.
So follow-up question, why 4:30 in the morning? That to beat LA area traffic, or why so?
No, they started their first shift at that time, and I think 5:30, but then it was a very again in terms of the culture there, it was, if I'm an engineer and I'm going to be there and I'm going to show that I'm there for the production floor, and if I get in at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. and the production team members are getting in there at 5, it just shows that you have no skin in the game as to when you are going to show up. So I think it was a very And the other thing is, they may just try to see if I could do it and seeing how well I would stick.
So it seems like it's a matter of showing respect to the team members, that I'll be here, absolutely. I'm supporting you. And then maybe it was a question of how much does Mit want the job?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it was hard at first. I even fell asleep on the production floor one time, and the amount of grief that I took from the team members on the production floor was enough for me not to do it ever again. So it was a funny story because I ended up on great terms, and I learned a lot from the company. But oh man, it was quite the learning process.
But at least they gave you a second chance after that mistake, if you will.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
So, maybe we can bounce back and forth a little bit between, your time at Toyota and other companies, and and how you're applying, different things you've learned at Gemba Automation. But I love this idea. Let's dig into this idea of the actual fact, or a phrase I use that I think has been influenced by some of this from former Toyota people is the real reality. And that sounds redundant, but do you really know what's going on, as opposed to hearing a report, seeing data, going out to the factory floor, the Gemba, if you will, seeing things firsthand. I'd just be curious to hear some of your reflections about that idea as you've been in other organizations, either times where you've seen people get tripped up because they didn't know the actual fact, or how do you help make sure people are going that way?
I think the quote for that kind of exemplifies this. You ask the hard questions first, and that equals the easy life. You ask the easy questions first, and that equals a hard life, right? So what the main thing that the leadership kind of instilled was, if you wanted to point out something on the production floor, it was more of a fact of show me, and the leader would walk you to the production floor and to understand that. And in addition to that, I think one of the biggest valuable areas was they had a good way of making your thinking visible, right? So there's a concept, I'm sure your audience knows, we have problem-solving A3s, right? So in terms of problem-solving A3s, what you have to do is you go from steps 1 through 8 or 1 through 6, and then you have to essentially solve a problem at the end of that, right? But then, so my boss when I was there, who I owe a significant amount to, his name is John Sugup, and he's still at Toyota. And he, essentially what he did was give me a challenge, and then I would I want you to figure out the current state of how our propellers are installed in our trucks. I'd sketch out what I thought was happening. And then what the A3 did was it made you able to make what is in your mind very organized on paper, right? And it kind of showed your overall thinking pattern. Now, as I kind of progressed, it was the organizations that was first figuring out how to figure out what actual facts are. And then in addition to that, the way that they do it is try to figure out ways to make your thinking visible, right? Whether it's something tangible that they can see on how you think. That was, so I was, after a while, I said, wait, these A3s they're not really for this piece of paper that I have in front of me. They're for my manager to be able to guide my problem-solving thinking, and the A3 is a way for me to extrapolate what's in my mind on this piece of paper. So I think one of the things I've noticed, I work for basically if you take a look at overall market cap and the companies that I've worked for, I've gone from Toyota, and it's slowly trickled down. But and luckily, smaller organizations have a little bit of a better ability to have fact more visible because there's less bureaucracy that has to go on, right?
Yeah. And when you talk about making that thinking visible, it seems like then it's easier to coach somebody.
Yeah.
And for you to get coaching in that environment, maybe now you're the one being the coach. But yeah, I'd be curious to hear more about your experiences or insights around, it's not just writing the document, but the collaboration, the questions, the coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. So the coaching that was given there was a combination. So in terms of the development that Toyota brought you through, so they made sure that you had your foundations before they built on top of it, right? You're really not going to understand how to problem solve anything if you don't know what standard work is,
Mhm.
right? So if you don't know what the basics of tack time are and the basics of work content are, you're really not going to be able to learn on top of that, right? So I think in addition to development classes that they had me take and the coaching that came from the leadership there. So the coaching that comes from the leadership there, it was very strict. It was, I only will pay attention if I believe that the facts are what the facts are.
Mhm.
And I think in general, you know, everyone has the ability to, in their mind, to, you have a lazy approach to covering up this, and you know you're doing something that you really shouldn't be doing. And Toyota has a good way of taking a knife to that and basically uncovering that this is the actual facts.
Mm. Can you, is there an example that comes to mind?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So absolutely. So in the example that I had mentioned to you, right? So we were tasked with installing the propeller shaft. So the propeller shaft is the thing that sits underneath the truck, right? And the current stage that we were delivering it was causing a lot of wait time because there's a lot of team members that had to wait to install something because this wasn't there, right? And then the obvious solution was obviously, okay, so we need to move it further upstream or in the process so people don't have to wait for it to be installed, right? So if you take a look at that example, that's the overall message is, okay, it needs to be installed at that time, right? But then if you take a look at the current state, so if I were to jump to conclusion, say, okay, instead of being installed in group 3, I want it to be installed in group 2. Okay, very easy solution. But then you take a look at what the actual facts are on the production floor. Okay, so why is it installed at this certain time? So it was important for it to be installed at that point because immediately we had to hook another component to it, right? So rather than moving it upstream, what I did was we had to create a subassembly cell that would do all the work that needed to have been done beforehand to be able to install it to that location, right? So I wouldn't know what the facts were if I didn't spend, X amount of time on the production floor. So every time I would learn something, I would have to come back and I would say, okay, this is what I'm learning. This is what I'm learning. Okay, so how do you solve that problem? How do you solve that problem?
And you know, you were a process engineer, so you're pretty tightly connected to the shop floor. Did you see similar behaviors modeled by managers and leaders above you in terms of them going out to make sure they understood the real reality?
Yeah. And all of our report outs were on the production floor with all the team members that are standing up and showing respect to the people on the production floor, right? So if you take a look at what quote unquote corporate report out would be in the corporate sense, it's sitting in a conference room.
Right.
All the leaders are sitting down, and there's one person talking. That person's talking, and they're kind of above everyone. Whereas at Toyota, you're on the production floor and you're reporting out there, and every single person is standing. Yeah. And it also, if you're going to ask questions, you're going to make sure that those questions are valuable because everyone is standing on the production floor and no one really wants to waste anyone's time.
So it wouldn't, you wouldn't have expected somebody to just be talking and grandstanding, or they're going to use that time efficiently and respectfully.
Yeah, and exactly. And it's also they avoid the "it's on the next slide" phrase, meaning they let you go through your entire presentation, and they'll take a mental log as to the questions they want to ask, and then they'll fire away 3 to 5 absolutely pointed questions that makes you feel that they were first listening to what you were saying, in addition to asking you the right questions to challenge you in the right way.
Mm. So, Matt, I want to come back to there's another word you used earlier that I know has a lot of meaning to people at Toyota. There's that word challenge, right? So people
Yep.
a lot of times know the word Kaizen or continuous improvement, or maybe I ask you what that word means. Let's do that first, actually. So, I mean, there's direct translations, then there's context. So before we get to challenge, like what did the word Kaizen come to mean to you at Toyota?
Sure. So, I mean, obviously, the direct translation is good change, right? But in terms of, I thought of Kaizen as more of a personal journey, meaning if I took a look at every year or every year and I looked back as to the amount that I learned and developed as a result of what I learned there, it was you basically understanding how to suppress nervousness and you not knowing things in your mind. So what I mean by that is, I mean, when I first got there, I had no idea how I was going to do anything. I mean, I was how what I learned there could, in a year, if I take a look at where I was really nervous about what I was trying to do there. I was really nervous about. So it was more to me about suppressing the nervous thought as to whether I could accomplish something and changing for the good in that way. And then they gave you another project, and anytime you're given a challenge or a project, you get a little nervous and you're a little worried that you're not going to be able to accomplish something. But then you're chipping away at it one step after the other, after the other, after the other. And I mean, it may not be, this is why the Toyota Kata example is so important, because it's not a journey from here to here like this. It goes like this to here, right? And for me, Kaizen and challenge means to understand that humans are inherently going to be nervous about things that they can't see themselves accomplishing at that time. But being able to have the systematic thinking and systematic problem-solving approaches to accomplish that, right? And I mean, I'm sure everyone, you're going to start skiing for the first time. You're going to be nervous and you're not going to be confident about it. But essentially, once you start learning and once you start breaking it down, it becomes a lot simpler.
Yeah. So you kind of tied together those two concepts. Kaizen and challenge seem to be very interconnected, and they hired you to do something you hadn't done before. Compare that to a lot of companies who only want to hire somebody who's proven that they've done the exact same job in a very similar setting before, but that doesn't really lead to a lot of growth. And people complain about, well, they only want to hire me for a job I've already done. I want to do something new. And it seems like that challenge, or that opportunity to do something new combined with coaching, leads to people development that's good for the employee and the company. And Toyota's often described, I've interviewed some of them, Toyota people who say, Toyota is a people development company. Like, what was your experience around that idea?
Yeah, I mean, I had maybe a lucky approach to. I didn't really have very many bad habits that they had to.
It was too early
because I started working there. Just before my 21st birthday. So I mean, I was very, very, very new. So they had a blank slate. I mean, the only thing I knew there was before then was a few engineering terms. I knew that I liked certain sports teams, and I knew that I liked the outdoors. But before then, I was a lot more green, and now even I catch myself with the same exact. I mean, I even joke that my wife knows what she'll even say, oh, what's the current state of something, or it's the same type of terminology that I'll use is to, okay, well, what's the standard work? Where is the standard work? And I mean, she'll even give me a little bit of a hard time that, okay, I think we need a PDCA this, but like, okay, but it's something that's just ingrained in me, and I mean, I feel fortunate enough for that.
Yeah. So then, another thing I was going to ask you was, I think of Kaizen and challenge. I think back to the first chapter of a book I love called Toyota by Toyota. It was written by Daryl Wilburn and Sammy Obara and some of their colleagues from Toyota, Kentucky. In that first chapter, they talk about Kaizen, challenge. I forget the exact order. Maybe first in that grouping of three things is the word humility, and leading with humility. I'm curious to hear your reflections on that leadership style. It seems like part of that humility is going to find out, do you really know something instead of assuming? But what else did you?
I'll give you one perfect example. Anytime you watch any person in a high leadership position walking a production floor, if they saw one piece of trash on the production floor, they were picking it up.
Yeah. Not telling someone else to do it, they were picking it up.
They were picking it up. They understood that if they would like the team members to have a certain mentality when they come to work, they have to embody that. So, I mean, even to this day, if I am walking a production floor and I see something, I'll pick it up. But I mean, it just shows that the level of leadership that they're willing to give, and it shows that they're humble. I mean, someone that's the general manager will pick up a piece of trash and throw it that way because that was just what we did.
And they're probably leading by example in all sorts of ways. I think you've sort of touched on that a little bit. I recently, in December, had a chance to go visit the Toyota Georgetown plant for the first time. I've been to other Toyota plants in Texas and Japan, and it's first time back in a little while because of pandemic times. But you're struck by the sense of discipline, for example, like standard work, if you will, and safety around walking. Like you see people walking within the painted lines. You don't see people rounding corners. You see people stopping and pointing, when they're going to go cross, and you can't tell exactly by the way people are dressed what level they're at in the organization, but you get a sense of whether people were wearing hard hats or maybe a little bit more office clothes. There was a consistent discipline. Like I would be completely surprised if I saw a Toyota executive, violating some of those guidelines that they want everybody to be following. And a lot of organizations don't have that same modeling or discipline from leaders. Like they want other people to follow the rules, but then maybe sometimes, let's say a factory where, a leader would come out without wearing safety glasses. Like, to me, that's awful. Like that's not good leadership.
Yep. And I mean, if the purpose of us having PPE is to keep humans safe, then every human that goes on the production floor should act that way. And then it also makes it a lot harder if you're trying to enforce PPE. If look, this manager just walked across the production floor, he or she's not even wearing any PPE. So I mean, it makes enforcement a lot easier because you don't get a lot of leadership that's not paying attention to the rules.
Yeah. So let's jump ahead and let's talk about your company, Gemba Automation. Like my understanding is you don't have a factory floor with painted lines, but there's there's ideas that you've brought from previous steps in your career to Gemba Automation. And I hope I'm afraid I'm gonna slip and say Gemba Academy because those are my friends at a different company in a different podcast. So I don't think I've slipped up, but now hopefully I've got that out of my system if I did. Gemba Automation, like how do you apply, PDCA thinking to starting a company?
Sure. Yeah. So if you take a look at, first I'll give you the correct answer to that. The best time and what you learned at Toyota was, let's just say here's an example, is we're in a stock room, right? And you're in a stock room, you want to see what % of the inventory in the stockroom is not needed, right? You could essentially take inventory of every part number in the stockroom, and you could say, okay, now that I've inventoried every part number, I think the amount of scrap or the amount of items that we don't need is probably about 60%, right? But then Toyota and I guess the lean philosophy is a little different. It's what amount of data and stats do I have in order to create an action, right? So they, in that process, they would say, okay, what we want to do is clean our warehouse and make sure we're only keeping stuff. So they would say, okay, well, I'd say the scrap rate, I surveyed, I don't know, 50 part numbers. I'd say a scrap rate is about this much amount. So we need to call a certain team in to start removing a lot of the scrap, right? So the biggest thing that you learn from that is that the action is significantly more important than the perfect analysis, right? So in terms of starting a company, you're really not going to do much unless you just do, right? And the PDCA, it's more of an understanding as to how much time to spend in the P so you can D correctly, right? And in a very similar concept was, okay, so you have an MVP, which in the startup term is a minimum viable product, which is, do you have something that your customers can attain some value out of, right? So there's companies that will spend a lot of time coding or building, and then they don't get customer feedback till much, much later in the process. So what Toyota taught me is in PDCA, you just learn as much as you can do, and then you have the check and the act at the end that corrects, and so you can pivot correctly. Right. So it's a matter of how to use those fundamentals to making sure that, okay, I have enough, I've built the product or the service enough that I can send it to my customers and get some feedback, or send it to customers and not get very much feedback. Right. So that's one of the big fundamentals. And so in terms of our company, and you said we don't have a production floor, right? So one of the big things you learned at Toyota was everyone has a customer, right? Everyone has a supplier and everyone has a customer. So engineering is essentially the supplier to supply chain, because they're creating the part that supply chain needs to order, right? And a lot of times on the production floor, one of the things that I saw was that a lot of the waste was the result of the supplier not creating the correct product or part, right? So what I wanted to do with Gemba Automation was start very early in the product development process, right? So we do a lot of design automation in addition in either SolidWorks or Inventor. And in addition to that, we understand that, okay, well, what's the customer of the design group? It's the machine shop, right? So we will have some team members that do CNC programming, and the communication on how to communicate that this part is designed correctly so it can be machined correctly is the direction that we wanted to take. So every time the engineers or the team members on production floor, they're putting together a part and they say, I don't know what the designer was thinking. So what I wanted to do is try to start a company to address that exact process, is start early on in design and have them be able to communicate to how this is going to be programmed and this is going to be machined, to essentially give our customers the correct value in product development, starting from right when you open your SolidWorks window.
And so, I mean, do you literally, like, did you think through this as an A3 problem solving process of like, what's the background, what's the problem statement? Like, how tightly did you have that problem statement defined before working on understanding the problem and the company being a countermeasure or countermeasures?
Yeah. So the problem was basically loud enough for a countermeasure to be put in place. And I mean, it was, we wanted to make sure that we addressed, now that we have the ability to, in the digital world, we have, CNC programmers that can be outside of a facility because they can just take a look at the code and how it's running and whether the code is running correctly, and designers outside of the facility. So in the digital world, you're able to do this. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure we were doing is combining technology with lean implementation and problem solving. Mm-hmm. So the answer to, that Venn diagram in the middle was where I would want to build a company.
Yeah. So when you say the problem statement was loud, how deeply did you have to go into understanding causes of the problem and to think through even to root causes? Could you have countermeasures that address the root causes, or is it enough to address the problem as it was?
Yeah, it's the temporary countermeasure. If let's just say you're trying to machine a radius, right, and the tool is getting snagged a little bit more, right, you could run it at different speeds to ensure that radius gets cut correctly if it's getting snagged. But the actual problem is we're not using the right tool, right? So asking yourself, okay, well, what radius of the tool do I need in order to machine this radius correctly? And if you keep asking why, well, if you just added a little bit more of a radius than to the actual part, then the tool could easily go into that edge, right? So it's a matter of keeping on asking why until you get to that. So essentially what we do is we do design, we do CNC programming. We also do full-on, process automation if the customer requires it. But what I wanted to build was just a company that was built around removing waste, whether it's overburden gets removed by automation. Process waste gets removed by just eliminating it, and variability gets removed by level loading. Yeah. So that was our overall goal.
So what was your minimum viable product? Because I've talked to Eric Reese and others in this podcast series about that idea, and they'll always emphasize. I think you touched on this earlier. It's not just minimum; it's viable. It's kind of providing some value.
Correct. So our business is a little bit different because it's more of a minimal viable service, right? So in terms of we offer right now, the company is mainly services, and we're trying to build some continuous improvement products that we can start giving our customers. But in terms, so the overall world, the problem that we saw in this one business segment we have is we do remote CNC programming, right? So if a team member or a machine shop doesn't have a full-time programmer, or they want to get the G code for a particular part, right now, because of, it may be a generational thing, or the amount of team members on the production floor that can do machining in addition to do coding, so kind of a combination of an engineer and a machinist, those are a little bit more rare than they were, say, 50 years ago, right? So a lot of machine shops are looking for outside resources to be able to machine their products correctly. So the first thing we do is one service is we just provide G code. So if a customer has a part that they need to get machined, they want us to provide them the G code. They send us the part. they tell us what machine that they want to send it on, and we can provide the G code based upon whether if they want to do a lot of them, but then we'll have the right fixturing and the right tooling for it. But if they want to do a short run, we can provide them that too. So, I mean, one of the minimum viable services we had was off-site remote programming. And I mean, right now it's been a good growth sector for us.
Yeah. So then if you've got good growth, I mean, do you feel like you have, as they call it, have you found product market fit, or if you will, service market fit, or how much do you how much did you have to iterate to sort of figure, okay, here's something that's meeting a real need.
Sure.
We can try to now scale this while improving, of course, PDCA cycles, like you said.
Yeah. I mean, the overall product, in terms of starting a business, there's a few levels. Number one, do you have a product or a service you want to offer? That's the right first question. And then the right second question is, has one person paid you for that, right? So that's essentially the people will talk with their finances. And then the third question is, are there a lot of companies out there that are wanting to pay you for this service, right? So those are step one, step two, and step three. And I mean, the speed at which you move from step one to step two and step three, and what you learn will essentially depict how successful of a business owner or entrepreneur that you actually are, right? So, I mean, one of the challenges that we had was the fact that, I mean, you give a shop some G code, and then we're expecting it to run correctly remotely without being on the machining center, right? So unfortunately, we live in a day that the way to communicate digitally is significantly better than the way you could communicate digitally before. So whether it's a matter of sending a YouTube video or sending a video about how the machine is performing, and then uploading that to a drive and then PDCAing it from that. But we had to learn really quickly that the communication structure post programming was very important in order for us to ensure success. And if you wanted to do it digitally, you have to have a good platform that allows customers to provide feedback. And I actually got this from this term from another podcast. One podcast that I listen to a lot. It's called My First Million. It's it's an entrepreneurship podcast. But one of the quotes that one of the guys on there he had there, he said, "A good symbol of a good company that started is you're spending a lot of time on customer support."
Yeah.
Right. So you're spending a lot of time on customer support means someone's wanting your product or service, right? And that's a good problem to have, rather than spending a lot of time on seeing if people want what you are delivering.
Right. Yeah. And that customer support, like I think in terms of KaiNexus, a company that's 10, 11 years into its growth. There's a lot of customer support. We have a far bigger customer support team than we have a sales team. And, you'd rather, I think, have a foot in the door with customers who say, the product isn't perfect,
right,
but it really fits our needs. And these people are willing to work with me, not just to answer questions about using it, but to take feedback about making the product better, right? So that, again, those ongoing PDSA or PDCA cycles are there.
Yep, absolutely.
So one other question, whether it's from your background at Toyota or experience as an entrepreneur, like one thing I think is interesting to me is this question of, and I think this is Eric Ries language, persevere or pivot. But I see this even like in PDCA cycles in continuous improvement, where we had an idea, we're testing that idea, and now there's debate of like, is that idea not working or is it not working yet? Like sometimes that's obvious and sometimes that's painfully vague. I'm curious how you would think through that question, whether it's even like a small scale improvement or with a company. When is it a mistake to pivot too soon? When would it be a mistake to persevere too long?
Yeah, I mean, so that so I'll give you a kind of a little bit more of a personal journey and a personal story in terms of that question.
Mhm.
So the way that I would the two words that I would dumb entrepreneurship down to would be executable creativity, right?
Mhm.
So we're all humans, right? We're all unique. I mean, I have a unique background. You have a unique background. We're not kind of molded into one particular area, right?
Yeah.
And we all are very good at a few things, and we're very good at a combination of a few things,
Mhm.
right? So once you can find that, and once you can figure out where your creative advantage is and be able to execute on that, then you will be more successful. So essentially becoming authentic to yourself. So one of the I'll throw one more suggestion for your audience in is one of the biggest learnings or the biggest area where I think the most valuable in, let's say, timeless advice about entrepreneurship is a tweet storm by a guy named Naval Rubicon. And he has a tweet storm it's called How to Get Rich Without Getting Lucky, right?
Mhm.
And he kind of dissects some timeless principles in essential in how to create wealth and how to start a company. And one of the biggest things that he mentions is basically no one is going to be able to compete on being you than you, right? So you can
Sure.
escape competition through authenticity, right?
Yeah.
So as you go and figure out what you want to do in terms of starting a company, obviously you have the financial portion of whether you're growing and whether you're developing, but I would urge people to think about, are you doing more of what you want to do with your time as an entrepreneur, or are you not? And if you aren't, that's one way that I would consider pivoting, because if there's one area that you want to go in, there's people that are going to be able to do that 1,000 times better if they don't enjoy it,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So if you don't enjoy, so what I would say is just make sure that you're kind of productizing yourself, and that's in that tweet storm is that's very important to the growth for a company. And I think in addition, everyone understands, okay, I'm develop a product, do people like it or not? But
Yeah.
the other question is, am I doing more with my time that I want to be doing?
Yeah. Yeah. There's that diagram that goes around on LinkedIn a lot of overlaps between, I forget I don't have it in front of me. I don't have it burned into memory, but it's looking at this overlap, a complex Venn diagram of interest and talent and passion and what people will pay for. And I think there's got to be an overlap there. But you make me think of that. And then you make me think of, Matthew May, former Toyota guy he was in LA or still in California, Toyota University. Have you ever met Matt May?
I haven't met him.
He was there well before you, but you guys would have a great conversation too. But he talks, others have talked about it too, starting the year, we're in January 2023 as we record this, of not just the resolutions and the to-do list, but the stop doing list or the do less of list. It's a good time to reflect and think back whether you have a strategic A3 for yourself or not. Like, what were the things in 2022 that I loved doing? What were the things that were a drag in energy, or what am I going to do less of in 2023? That's something I won't overshare, but I'm thinking through that professionally, and you and others might be as well. Right?
Sometimes an anti-bucket list is a lot better than a bucket list.
Sure.
Because I'm completely okay never doing X, and that's a lot more liberating than saying that I want to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. And there's a Bare Naked Lady song that comes to mind about, oh gosh, what's the title? But there's a whole song about the things I never want to do, which is maybe a theme song for the episode, and I'm a huge fan, and I'm having a brain cramp thinking about that. But there's an example of I'm going to come back to a phrase you used earlier because I'm trying to get better with this. Nervous mind, right? A nervous mind. It's thinking like, am I going to am I going to be able to write a good book? Am I going to do a good episode? Am I going to be a good host? And then there's nervous in terms of my mind's bouncing around to different things. Like you're saying things that are thought provoking, the good and bad of that both kind of come through. So I was going to ask you about meditation, right? So I think about that as a countermeasure to a nervous mind. Share your story and your experiences, what you've learned through that.
I would love to. So during COVID, everyone was sitting at home, right? And I'll rewind back. So my journey and the person that made me think about whether I want to add some sort of spiritual element to my mind was I had a cousin that passed away at the age of 22 of cancer, right? And I mean, he was wise beyond his years, and one of the biggest things was he made people truly question whether they are getting what they want out of life in terms of are you doing everything spiritually, are you doing everything emotionally to be happy, right? So I always had this inclination because of what he had kind of taught us while he was going through his entire procedure, right? And in addition to that, so while we were going through COVID, the same person that I had talked to you about, this guy Naval Rubicon, had this challenge that said it's a 60-day challenge. So the challenge for the 60 days is you need to be able to sit in a room with your eyes closed and not do anything for 1 hour. So
wow,
so I decided to do it, and I felt that there was value in it due to a lot of the spiritual thoughts and inclinations that I had in the past. So I decided to do it, and wow, it was really hard. It was absolutely hard. You have no idea the amount of thoughts and regrets and everything and desires that just cloud your mind that you're carrying around with you every day that you just don't know about, right? But then after a while, it became a lot easier. And I was wondering, I mean, I still meditate for anywhere from, let's say, 30 minutes to an hour every day. And
do you tend to do that in the morning or before bed?
Right when I wake up.
Right when you wake up.
Right when I wake up. Yep. And I'm wondering how did it get easier over time? I felt like it would get harder over time. So the example that I have a few examples here. So the first example is, think of your mind like a bathtub, right? And then you have a few things. You have oil, and you have oil, right? So oil is all of the regrets you have in your life, all of the desires that you have in your life that just keep accumulating over time, right? And then you have water, and water is your everyday life. It's you're building your company, picking people up from school. You have a lot of social obligations, and you have, life just happens, right? And unfortunately, what keeps happening is we have this layer of oil, right, that is on the top. But as life progresses, we keep putting water into our bathtub, but we aren't spending enough time draining any of it. We aren't spending enough time processing any of it. So what meditation does is it opens a valve at the bottom, and it allows stuff to the oil to slowly go to the bottom. And if you keep doing it long enough, then the valve keeps getting bigger and the flow rate starts getting improved. And then you can start clearing that oil. And then once you start clearing that oil, that's when you have a lot more of a clear mind.
So this is part of how a mechanical engineer thinks through meditation.
Yeah,
Valves and flow, and I know fluid
exactly.
dynamics, but
Absolutely. So essentially what meditation is doing is it's allowing you to clear that oil from your mind. And by you doing that, you have a lot more of a clear mind and a lot more of a clear thought, right? So I'll give you another kind of example. Is let's say you're going through life. What meditation and just thought assessment allows you to do is to treat your mind a lot like your body, right? So if you get a cut, right? When I get a cut, I'm obviously the pain from the cut hurts, right?
Yeah.
But then
I cut myself the other day in the kitchen cutting an onion.
Yeah.
Be careful holding up that finger for those on YouTube. But anyway, sorry.
So no problem. So you got cut, right? But then your mind is obviously it hurts from the cut, right? But then you're not really thinking of whether you are going to recover from that cut, are you?
It wasn't that bad. I don't need stitches.
Yeah, it'll eventually get better.
It still hurts, but it's going to heal.
Yeah, that exact comment is it's going to heal, right?
Yeah.
But unfortunately, when stuff happens to our mind, we don't think that way. Well, if something negative happens to your mind, right, and you think, oh man, I had this person do this bad thing to me, or something, I didn't perform the way I wanted to perform. So you essentially have a cut in your mind.
Yeah.
So you're worried about two things. You're worried about the cut that's in your mind, but you're also worried about the fact that the cut's gonna keep being there.
Yeah.
And the true fact is that the cut's not gonna be there forever, right? So it's you to basically treat these thoughts and negative emotions that go on in your mind a lot more like a physical cut, because you don't really worry about the physical cut being there forever. So it's been one of the greatest things that I've had to do in my life is to start this meditation process. And I mean, my wife does it too. And I mean, we definitely, it's an individual process, but it's good to have somebody to share it with. But I mean, I think that it's been maybe the best thing that I've taken into account, because fortunately or unfortunately, this mind that I have, barring any large AI breakthrough, I'm going to have this mind for the rest of my life, right? And if I don't take care of it, then it's not going to be a happy life.
Yeah,
and that's important.
Yeah. So when there was this challenge to do 45 to 50 minutes, that would be terrifying. I feel I wouldn't be able to do it. I've had a guest before, Bob Moore, who's a psychologist, who talks about Kaizen and, if you will, challenge, breaking it down to baby steps, right? So his advice, thinking back to his books and his episode, would be like, somebody were to propose this to me. I've tried meditating during the pandemic. I tried the app. It was free. I tried it. I'm like, I can't do this. And Bob Moore would say, okay, if it sounds terrifying to try to do 30 minutes, try to do 2. Right. And then sort of prove to yourself, okay, I could do 2. And then I would expect it to get easier. Did you think of a baby steps approach, or did you try to dive right in and say, I'll get better at doing 45 to 60 minutes?
Yeah, I have I guess, I don't know if it's a different opinion or, so a lot of the way your mind works is cause effect. So I started this X amount of thing, right? And that should help me in this particular area of my life, right?
Sure.
And unfortunately, you're never going to think in your mind that this meditation helped, because it's not going to become helpful until it becomes a little bit more of a habit. Right.
The same would be true with physical exercise, right? 2 minutes of exercise a day isn't helpful, but then if you can build yourself up to a level that's helpful, whether it's meditation or exercise, it's better to work your way up to it than to be intimidated and not try. But I'm sorry, I cut off your...
No problem. So a very, very similar example is I got to a point where I was meditating, obviously, for quite a bit of time. And then I got to a point that my mind was very clear. And I almost asked myself, why is my mind so clear right now? And then I'm like, wait a minute, I started this thing about 45 days to 50 days ago that was
Yeah.
supposed to help me with my mind. So it's almost just like a personal risk that you have to be okay with taking it, and you have to trust that what you're trying to do is worth it or not. But
Sure.
I mean, unfortunately, it's just a personal risk. So you are taking that risk. I could have spent. I mean, I've been doing it for quite a bit of time now, so I take that and multiply that the amount of years, and I could have had multiple full-time jobs of just done a lot more for a lot of things, but it was just a personal risk. And
it's lower risk. It's risk of opportunity cost or wasted time. It's not like something physical where if I were to go and try to run a marathon tomorrow, I would probably physically hurt myself because I'm not a runner. I exercise, but I don't. I'm not training for that. But yeah, the risk of trying is low. That mitigates the risk of it being a mistake. Yeah. But when you think of like the difficulty in cause and effect relationships, like the field of system dynamics, as they teach it at MIT and other places, is that humans really struggle to understand cause and effect when there are delays or lags. Yeah. Right. So if I dropped this coffee mug on my foot, it would hurt immediately. I would understand.
Yep,
my foot hurts because I dropped this mug. Now, like my situation, and I've had a recent discovery around, I think, cause and effect, persevere or pivot, has been more around lower back pain. That's harder to ascribe a root cause to, right? I've gone to physical therapists and describing different symptoms, and the one physical therapist said, "That's weird." Okay, thanks, great. I've stumped the physical therapist. So she suggested different countermeasures, but the one sporadic countermeasure I hadn't been disciplined enough about was yoga. Mm-hmm. Right. So my wife was kind of, pushing me to do this. And so here's what I think I've learned is like doing it a couple times a week or sometimes going a couple weeks without it. I'm like, well, it's not really helping. Well, I wasn't really doing it. But then back in December, I made a commitment to it. I'm up to 33 consecutive days of about 30 minutes of yin yoga is what I've really kind of gotten into. Mm-hmm. So now that's kind of halfway between, meditation and yoga, right? You're holding poses a very long time. I'm fidgety. So like being able to stay still is helpful in addition to stretching my lower back. But now I got about 20 days into it. I'm like, now I'm seeing the effect. And instead of it feeling like something I should do, I'm excited to do it. And I would I want to keep that momentum.
Yeah, and the excitement, absolutely. I know it feels really weird to say, but the 30 minutes to an hour that I spend with myself every day is once that becomes one of the best things you ever do, the world has kind of a little less to offer. I mean, you can participate in a lot of the stuff, but I mean, and obviously I love everyone that I've surrounded myself with, but it's just an amazing journey. And I mean, I've learned a lot from this 60-day challenge, and it's the art of doing nothing. I think that's the tweet storm by this guy Naval Rubicon. Okay.
I'll look that up too. The art of
doing nothing.
Great. Well, so I won't ask it. Well, you've already answered the question. Okay, this wasn't the best 60 minutes of your day, Mit, but thank you for surrounding yourself with me and the listeners.
It was awesome, Mark.
I appreciate you doing it and sharing, kind of this mix of perspectives. And I just love it. You're connecting dots when people would ask, how are ideas from a manufacturing company transferable? People in the startup realm are still, we're still trying to, convince them there's something of benefit in healthcare. There's a lot of people asking, how do we know if there's benefit? And there's something to be said for try it and see, be committed to it, whether it's meditation or yoga or lean. Like maybe there's a lesson or a final point here of like, don't do it half-assed, don't do it sporadically. At some point, you've really got to commit to it, or otherwise you might not see results.
Absolutely. Trust yourself, be patient. And I mean, if you don't see yourself doing something for a long term and may not be good for you to start it. So, I mean, it's a great journey, and I mean, we all have we all have our lives, and might as well do what we can to make them better.
Well said. So our guest today again has been Mit Vyas. He is the managing director for Gemba Automation. Go check out his website, gembaautomation.com. Final question. Like, who, people listening fit certain profiles, who are the people most likely to benefit from coming and learning about your services?
Sure. So in terms of the people that I feel I would say, if you are starting your professional journey as an engineer, I think that this would be a very good podcast for you to listen to. And
no, but I mean to go check out your company.
Oh, yeah.
Go check out Gemba Automation.
Sure. So if you are a company that has a machine shop, you're a company that manufactures a product that gets designed in SolidWorks, Autodesk Inventor, or you are a company that needs some more support in automation on the production floor. So our three major segments are engineering services, manufacturing automation, and machine shop solutions. So anyone that would fit in those categories, I'd be happy to discuss how we could remove some waste in your organization.
All right. Well, so again, you can go check that out, gembaautomation.com. Mit Vyas, thank you so much for being a guest here today. Really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was awesome, Mark. Thank you very much.